Hey, it's Hillary. Join me for a helpful and hopeful chat about mental health in our community. So grab a cup of coffee or tea. This is Wedgwood's Coffee Break Conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Wedgwood's Coffee Break Conversation podcast. We are back with a slightly new look and new hopeful and helpful conversations with the incredible people who work at and grow through Wedgwood. I am your host, Hillary Kirkendall, and I will be sitting down for a coffee break conversation with one of our incredible team members today, Kaylee Jackson. Thanks for joining us, Kaylee.
Thank you for having me, Hillary.
I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit.
Absolutely. So my name is Kaylee Jackson, and I am a licensed mastered clinical social worker and certified alcohol and drug abuse counselor.
Ooh.
It's a lot of words, a whole lot of things to say. I'm a therapist, and I'm trained to also provide substance abuse counseling. I've worked here at Wedgwood for about 4 years, and I work in our Cook Closs program. That program serves ages 12 to 17, and we serve victims of human trafficking or severe sexual assault.
So you've got a very expansive background in mental and behavioral health.
Yes.
Awesome. So here at Wedgwood, we focus a lot on mental and behavioral health and the well-being of kids and families in our care. And there are a lot of factors that go into being mentally and emotionally healthy, and that can range from coping skills to like your physical health to relationships, all sorts of things. And one thing I hear people talk a lot about is boundaries, and whether that's boundaries with your work-life balance or with relationships or even your own feelings. And it's something I see a lot like in my Instagram and TikTok feed. But one thing I don't hear a lot about when people are talking about boundaries on social media, and it's probably because they only have like 10 seconds or whatever, is how to do that. Like what practically boundaries look like. So Kaylee, let's talk about boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are they?
Yeah. So I like to simply put that boundaries are this line or this fence around your house of safety or comfort. So we all get to have a fence around ourselves in our window of tolerance. And what I may fence in my life may be different from what you fence in. But whatever we fence in are the things that we're going to tolerate in our relationship that make us feel safe, supported, and comfortable. Those things outside of the fence are those things that are in our boundaries, right? Those are those things that make us feel unsafe or we just will not tolerate in a relationship.
Sure. So how do you determine where you put that fence?
Yeah. So I always would say you got to start with a self-assessment. You cannot tame something if you can't name it. You cannot start to heal it if you can't feel it.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to identify what it is that's the problem. So ask yourself in your current relationships, what's working and what isn't? What makes you comfortable? What makes you tick? What is something that you want to get rid of in future relationships? What's something you want more of? And as you identify discomfort, you identify something that needs a boundary. For example, if you identify that when someone raises their voice or they get angry with you, it makes you feel a little bit scared and on edge in that relationship. That may be something you need to set a boundary on in the future to say, I don't want more of that. And if this individual isn't going to respect that boundary, there may be some natural consequences that come with that to where you can't further a relationship or you need to set further boundaries.
So in that situation, when you're feeling scared when a particular person is yelling at you, what does that boundary look like and how do you communicate it to that person?
It starts with having a vulnerable conversation, being able to sit down one-on-one, preferably with that individual and say, hey, Hillary, I really didn't like the way you talked to me earlier. It made me feel really uncomfortable and scared. In the future, I would really like if maybe we could talk calmly because when you raise your voice, it really makes me shut down. And in that conversation, I'm not trying to put blame on you. I'm not trying to say you're a bad person. I'm just trying to say, look, these are my needs. And if you're a good friend or you want to continue to be in my life, you'll listen to these boundaries I'm going to set to make our relationship constructive and healthy in the future.
Okay, great. So I love that. So like this person is saying, if you're upset with me, my boundary is I'm going to need you to take a step back before we discuss further.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
And I say one-on-one because oftentimes people will immediately react, right? We are in a culture where we don't like pain, we don't like discomfort, so we respond immediately, which is a good thing, right? We've learned to heal, we've learned to protect each other, and we don't want to see one hurt, but I think we also have to recognize how the other individual might feel. So if you address them in front of a room full of people, they may automatically feel judged and scared, and they may not want to accept your boundaries in the future because they feel like you're just being rude to them. But if you have that one-on-one conversation, it's more likely that they hear you out. You're going to feel more comfortable giving some details and actually provide them information that'll be useful, as well as they may be able to ask some clarifying questions so that they can better that relationship in the future.
It probably would give you the time to kind of collect your thoughts and figure out what it is that is troubling you and what it is that you need to feel safe.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that because I feel like a lot of times people don't know what their boundaries are until they're crossed. People don't know that they're uncomfortable until it happens.
Yeah.
And so when doing that self-reflection, like you said, you can actually identify, wow, that made me uncomfortable. And, oh, what was that warning sign that said I didn't like that? Because often people are just exploding and then having to move backwards. But we can be more proactive in processing our thoughts and emotions and identify it so that in the future it's a lot better.
Yeah. So once we've identified the boundary and kind of had the conversations we need to have to put those in place, what does it look like to maintain and keep a boundary? And do you have to be like super rigid with them?
I don't think boundaries have to be very rigid. I like to say a clear line because it's a line that sometimes can be crossed, right? When we talk about zones, you have a comfort zone for a reason, and you can slightly get into that uncomfortable zone and still grow. When we're talking about a fence, you can get all the way up to the line of the fence, and what may be all the way back at your house is way more comfortable than what's all the way at the line of the fence. And so being able to understand your boundaries are going to have zones to it, and you're going to want to push yourself a bit. Maintaining boundaries is going to be continuously communicating. So just because you set a boundary once doesn't mean you're not going to have to repeat it. An individual has their own boundaries, like I said, and so what they act off of is going to be their safety zone. And you may have to remind them, hey, right now you're crossing into my zone and you're making me feel uncomfortable. An analogy I like to use is that we all have these fences, right? But you can't trespass into my yard and set my fence. And I can't trespass into yours and set yours.
Yeah.
So my boundaries are mine and yours are yours. And the only way I know what your boundaries are talking about it. And if I cross them, and I don't mean to, it's your job though to say, hey, that was my boundary and you crossed it, and maybe in the future this could change. And if they continue to violate those boundaries, that's where some of those natural consequences may come in. You may have to leave a room when they're talking because you're just too uncomfortable, and you've reiterated your boundaries several times and you just don't feel respected. So maybe you have to walk away, but that doesn't mean you have to end the relationship right away. Maybe you're walking away and then you're going to come back and talk about it. But again, protecting your boundaries may be putting some space at times.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit more about an idea you just hit on. Another thing I see a lot on social media is like cutting out all of the toxic people, and like you don't need that negativity in your life, which there's some truth to that. And I'm sure in your work you see that quite a bit. There are people that need to be not in kids' lives anymore.
Yes.
But that's not always the case. And sometimes, you can't just cut everyone out. You'll be by yourself. So how do you navigate keeping boundaries that keep you safe and healthy, but also keeping relationship with the people in your life?
So I think I got to go back a little bit to explain. There's some different types of boundaries,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And I like to put them into 3 categories. So you have that emotional, that physical, and that professional.
Okay.
And within those boundaries, what they may look like with a friend versus a family member versus an intimate partner may look different, right? And so, for example, with that physical boundary, that's what you would accept for touch. What I may accept for touch with a family member is much different from a stranger. With that emotional boundary, it's how I feel. So I'm going to definitely withstand some more irritation and frustration from family than I may a stranger, right?
Right.
And then that professional is being able to say no or set boundaries at work. And so when we think about having to maintain those boundaries or someone crossing them and not cutting them out of your life, you have to first think about the relationship. In reality, you're going to give more chances to a family member than you may a stranger. But at the same time, you want to think to yourself, how serious is this boundary? Is this boundary just something that makes me a little uncomfortable, something I may be able to challenge, work through a little bit more with myself so it's not such a rigid boundary? Or is this a really strict boundary for me that if it is crossed, I feel unsafe?
Yeah.
I think people have to understand that there is some kind of levels to boundaries, right? And we have to consider someone's past trauma.
Yeah.
When an individual is explaining their boundary, you may think, oh, that's kind of silly. I hug everyone.
Right.
But to them, they've had some trauma behind it. So I think you have to have that ongoing vulnerable communication to understand, and you have to give some benefit of the doubt, some chances. Like I said earlier, a lot of times people are violating boundaries because they didn't know it was one. And so talk to them. Ask them if they truly understand your boundary. Give some clarifying information, and if they continue to violate it, then take those next steps. Leave the room, maybe give the relationship a break and then come back, and then maybe eventually actually leave the relationship. But it's not something you should jump to right away.
Right. And I love that you've emphasized that all of this takes conversation up front.
Yes.
You can't assume that people understand what your boundaries are. Relationships require communication. So I just think that's a really important point to emphasize, that relationships and boundaries take work.
Absolutely. And it goes back to that assumption, right? We are trying to cultivate this culture of trauma informed, where we're assuming everyone has trauma, everyone's been through something, everyone has boundaries. That's great to assume, but let's also take out the assumption of what that trauma or those boundaries are, and let's ask those specific questions. Because again, we cannot assume someone else's boundaries and act off of those. We need to let them label it for themselves.
And what better way to care for the people in your life than to ask them what makes them feel the most safe or like their best self?
Yes. And I love that you said that, because when we talk about boundaries, sometimes people automatically think, what makes me feel unsafe or untrusted or uncomfortable? Boundaries are also what makes you feel good. What are the people in your life that you want more of? What are the things at work that bring you joy that you want to do more of? You can have healthy boundaries, right? Those boundaries that accept more of the good in your life that you want to do more of.
Which brings me to my next kind of thought and question is, you talking about having healthy boundaries, but can boundaries be harmful or unhelpful?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the biggest reasons that boundaries become harmful or unhelpful is that we're not communicating them to someone, and then we're just exploding when they didn't follow by our boundaries, or we're toxic and we're cutting them out of our lives thinking that they're toxic. But now we're becoming toxic individuals because we're not being relational. We're not using any sort of problem-solving skills, and we're just jumping to cutting people out without actually communicating first. So when I think about an unhelpful boundary, I think about people setting unrealistic expectations, setting expectations for someone that they don't even know.
Yeah, how can you expect someone to treat you a certain way or act a certain way if you don't tell them what you are expecting them to do?
Yeah. And it goes back to culture too, right? If you grow up in a household where all you do is hug, or you maintain eye contact, and then you welcome someone else in with a hug and eye contact, and to them it's disrespectful, you're not going to know any better until they tell you.
Yeah.
And then once they tell you and they give you the chance to follow that boundary, then if you violate it, then you're in the wrong. But first, let them give you a reason, or the reason why they think that that's a boundary.
I was talking to somebody on the team not that long ago, and they said something that I think applies here. It's when people know better, they do better. And you can't expect people to treat you the way you want to be treated unless you tell them how you want to be treated.
Oh, I love that. I love that, because I use all the time, if you can name it, you can tame it. You've got to feel it to heal it, right? And you have to go through these things in order to recognize that it makes you uncomfortable. No one has recognized a boundary without first going through something either uncomfortable or really pleasant that they recognized they didn't want or they wanted more of.
How would you suggest people kind of go through that self-reflection process to figure out what their boundaries are?
I'd say asking yourself some questions. So honestly, sitting down, looking at your current relationships and past, and asking yourself, what are the qualities that you really enjoy? What are the qualities that make you shut down, or you leave a conversation feeling fatigued, stressed, questioning your self-worth? Is that consistent? Is that something you want to continue experiencing? And if not, it brings you that discomfort. Let's learn how to communicate that. Let's set a boundary. Let's plan a time at that next family outing or group conversation to say, hey guys, I really realized I was doing some self-thinking, and when I leave these conversations, I'm feeling stressed and down, and I want to leave conversations feeling uplifted. And I'm just wondering if maybe we could talk more positively when we're together, because that would really help my mental health. It's nothing about you. It's all about me and what I want more of, because it's my boundary.
I like that you also framed it in a positive way, because I feel like a lot of people have similar feelings, like, oh, I leave my family gatherings feeling very stressed out. Everyone is so negative. All they do is complain. But that's not how you approached that conversation. It's like, you guys are all negative and I feel awful when I leave. It's like, I think we could feel better if we just talked more positively when we are together. And I think that is a great reminder that you have to think intentionally about how you want to frame things to get the outcome that you want.
It's all about the energy you provide, right? So if I come in, I'm automatically kind of crossing my arms like, guys, I went home last night and it was so negative and I didn't feel good, and you, right? We're just blaming. They're automatically shutting down. They're like, gosh, well, what happened to her today? She's really negative. There's no problem-solving communication. There's no resolution in it. It's just blameful. But if you come in with a resolution, I'm identifying the problem, and I'm saying, you know what? I think this could solve it. I have some hope to it, and I'm willing to collaboratively problem solve. they may be more willing to hear you out. You know, it's the energy that you provide to the conversation that's going to get the response that you want.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. So, Kaylee, what are your top 3 tips for people who want to start setting boundaries for themselves?
I'd say 1, assess yourself. Look internally. When we talk about boundaries, it's not about the other person. It's about you and what you're comfortable with. 2, I would say learn how to say no. All of your yeses lose value if you never learn how to say no. You have to be able to say no in your personal and professional lives. And I think the 3rd is to really value communication. And when I say communication, I'm not talking text, TikTok, Instagram. I'm talking about face-to-face, sit down, have those vulnerable communications and conversations to say, I really like this and I want more, or I don't like this and we need to change it.
It's all about having face-to-face conversations. So much can get lost in communication via text or email or whatever. Yeah. And boundaries are all about the relationship and being personable. So why would you want to do that in a non-personable fashion?
Absolutely.
That is a great tip. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Kaylee. This was such a fabulous conversation. And I think it's important to have space to dive deeper into these conversations around mental health and our well-being that we can't quite get into on social media. So thank you for taking the time and being here today.
Thank you.
If you'd like additional support when it comes to taking care of and prioritizing your mental health and well-being, Wedgwood is here to help. You can check out our website or the links in the episode description for more information.